Good afternoon, good evening around the world. My name is Doug Brunke. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Chamber, and I'm really pleased to be moderating a great conversation today, helping SMBs, small and medium-sized businesses, to adjust to this new current world that we're in. I'm very happy to first introduce Maimoon Mustafa. He's the Global Chamber Executive Director that we have in Bangladesh, and he's been very diligent in pulling together an expert panel to be able to help you as an SMB or as an individual, whether you're in Bangladesh or whether you're in any country, to start thinking about ways to pivot, ways to adjust, ways to be more successful going forward. Maimoon, thank you so much for pulling this together. We really look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you, Doug.
Would you like to say a few opening words and then introduce our first speaker?
I think that would be amazing. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Let's Disrupt series of events. My name, as Doug already previously mentioned, is Maimoon Mustafa. I am the Executive Director of Global Chamber Barisal and the co-founder of the Let's Disrupt initiative. Although the world faces many challenges, constructive dialogue and discourse can help us overcome the difficulties in the status quo as well as the foreseeable future. With that belief that innovative ideas across cultures and communities can develop a better tomorrow, the Global Chamber Barisal, Movementum Consultancy and Facilitation Group, and the United Nations Development Program in Bangladesh's research facility partnered up to jointly organize the platform of Let's Disrupt. These webinars and live events aim to spark conversations on contemporary issues affecting our world, from Industry 4.0 to the Sustainable Development Goals, and are intended to help shape research-based policy recommendations and interventions. For this first webinar, in this initial three-part COVID-19 series, we will dig into how the global pandemic is disrupting small and medium enterprises, SMEs in developing nations, highlighted in the context of the Bangladesh economy. We will be discussing challenges and opportunities for growth and success in the post-COVID-19 environment. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our first speaker, Zeeshan Abedin, who is the country economist of the International Growth Center, IGC, in Bangladesh, and specializes in applied microeconomics and policy evaluation. Dishen.
Thank you so much for such a kind introduction, Maimoon. And Doug, happy to be here with others on the panel, Dishen and Bijon. A very timely and interesting topic to discuss today. And what we have faced here in Bangladesh, which is where I'm from, and not very different anywhere else in the world, is SMEs, small, medium enterprises, even micro enterprises, have been the most hard hit, unarguably, by the standstill, the literal standstill that the COVID-19 has brought about. In my capacity as an economist for a research outfit that is known as the IGC, we're in South Asia and in Africa, and what the interface that I mainly work at, and it's not so much directly with SMEs, but with the government and enabling policies for SMEs to thrive, because the thesis that we believe in is SMEs are a very critical cog of the engine that drives economic growth. Now, as an economist in these kinds of forums, I think the general expectation is you talk about whether the bailout package was big enough, whether the bailout package that could have gone to SMEs got diverted to some other sector, and the injection of funds and the access to finance that we tend to focus on. But let me take a break, take this opportunity to depart from that a little bit in this deliberation, in the sense that the way to look at COVID-19 as a shock, as a crisis, is government, with its policy levers, has two roles to play. One is immediate, as a form of relief, and the other is more on the recovery end of things. And I think more befitting to today's title of the discussion is recovery strategy. So let's not spend too much time on what kind of relief can be provided to this sector. By and large, it has been, and there are debates around it. But let's talk about what could be the strategy to really get this sector to recover and sustain at a recovered level. And for that, making borrowing easy is not it. It would take a complete rethinking of what SMEs do, which industries they focus in, which services they choose to deliver, and so forth. A crisis of this magnitude has leveled the playing field. So new entrants, it's almost as the barriers to entry are almost negligible. It's as easy for new entrants as it is for seasoned SMEs in this space. So what can the government do to enable it, and what kind of concerns should the government try and address? And for that to happen, I think it will take a wide-ranging capacity building to happen among SMEs. To understand the market, and of course, some of it is coming from having taught at a business school for 6 years, but business skills are probably more important than ever. And entrepreneurs do instinctively do that, but I think a way in which, so my friend on the panel, Bijon, he's very active on the incubator and accelerator scene, which the private sector does very well, but the government, the time has come for the government to step in and do it at a massive scale. Authorities like, I'm talking specifically about the Bangladesh government, authorities like B.E.T, Bangladesh Investment Development Authority, the ICT division, they have such initiatives, but these initiatives need to be scaled up massively and has to be sort of broadcast throughout. But when I say broadcast, they also need to be targeted, because it's not a one-size-fits-all for everyone. So I think capacity building is something of utmost importance when it comes to reviving the SMEs, because if there's going to be another even shock comparatively smaller to the one that we're currently experiencing, if it's going to knock out SMEs, then it's going to be sad, and it's going to be quite unwise for the SME sector to move forward in the way that it has. So I think coping mechanisms and the resilience building, those things have to be really sharpened and focused on, and targeting. The kind of training investments need to be charted out properly. And yes, so training, capacity building, and business skills, managerial capacity is one whole area, I think, that needs a lot of attention and investment. The other one being Bangladesh being the way it is, it's a very densely populated country with a lot of agglomeration externalities that we can think of. And there's a sense of cooperation, there's a sense of learning, and there's a sense of helping one another that can happen in SMEs in Bangladesh, in South Asia, as compared to other parts of the world like Africa, where agglomeration externalities are not as easily achieved or as easily attained. So I think the way one business can help another, where one business can complement another, is something that I as an economist feel needs to be exploited. And thirdly, I think this applies to both agricultural and non-agricultural, and I would expect others on the panel, because they're better suited to speak about this, is data. The use of data to really, because SMEs are a heterogeneous group. Not all SMEs are the same. Not all SMEs operate at the same pace of growth. Sizes vary wildly. I think the use of data to really profile SMEs and to cater to their needs is something that we have not harnessed in the past. So let me leave it at that, Doug. I wanted to take an offbeat approach to kind of policy thinking that the government could engage in. Throwing money at the sector is obviously solving part of the problem, and of course, immediately, sort of words, money is more important, working capital is more important. But I think for the recovery to happen and sustain, there needs to be more thoughtful policies that need to be devised and implemented in a timely fashion. And there are lessons to be learned from the private sector that the government can pick up and scale up massively. And these are some of the policy lessons that I think it has been tried globally. Zambia, Tanzania, I'm sure Dishen can talk about the experience in South Africa. These have been tried, these have been tested, and they have worked. For some reason, because I'm familiar with the policy landscape in Bangladesh, we tend to veer towards how much money is being ascribed to certain sectors, but the discussion doesn't happen so much about what other enabling policies that we could put up and assist the government to put together. Thanks, Doug.
Okay, thank you, Zeeshan. Thank you for kicking us off. Our next speaker is Bijon Islam. He's the CEO of LightCastle Partners. Bijon is the co-founder and CEO of that firm. It's an organization that focuses on creating data-driven opportunities for growth and impact for development partners, companies, SMEs, startups, and he's done a lot of work. He's worked in 100 plus businesses and development partners, 300 plus SMEs, startups, and 20 accelerator programs. Really looking forward, Bijon, to your comments today. And I should mention also that those of you who are watching around the world, do send in your questions to the chat box, and we're happy to address them along the way. I think along the way as well today, we'll be discussing what's actually happening on the ground with SMEs. We'd love to hear a little bit more about that, how Bangladesh, what's working, what's not working, where are there some opportunities there, and how does what's happening in Bangladesh contrast with other countries in the region and the world. So our next speaker, Bijon, I'm looking forward to hearing more.
No, thank you, Doc, and thank you, Dishen, for the initial remarks, and Maimun for inviting me and Dishen here, and everyone on the call. Good evening, or whatever part of the world you are. So I'm just going to share my screen. Let me know if you can see it. I want to show a slide deck that will be, I think, will be easier.
Perfect.
Can you see my screen? I'm just going to shorten this. And I'm going to start presenting. Can everyone see it?
You're good.
Perfect. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact that we're seeing on the SMEs. Given that we have run a lot of accelerator programs over the last 7 years in Bangladesh, we collected data from the field by talking to a lot of our portfolio companies. Just to get a bit of background, there are close to 6 million SMEs that are current in Bangladesh. The number can vary a bit, but that was official statistics. Close to 7.8 million people work in the SMEs alone. So if you think about 4% for family, that's close to 32 million people who are dependent on this sector. Every 2 out of 3 employees are kind of employed by SMEs. Right now, the GDP contribution stands at 25%. That's almost $80 billion on a yearly basis, and that has 40% of the production output contribution in Bangladesh. If you just take a look at what are some of the things that are happening. So we surveyed close to 230 companies over the last couple of weeks. And what I figured out that 52% of the SMEs have stopped their business operations as of now. And that's huge. Just think about it. A lot of SMEs are not being able to operate into the current lockdown and everything. At least another 30% saw and at least a 50% drop in revenue, disruptions in supply chain logistics, not being able to provide services, not being able to reach customers. And this is some of the things that are real impact of the lockdowns is happening. Service SMEs obviously saw a bigger drop in revenue because services are much difficult to provide. Just a couple of days back, my hairdresser was calling me and saying that, look, Bijon, I want to come to your home to give the service, but we need to do this. It's tough because nobody wants to have service at this moment right now. Close to another 42% have cut down all marketing costs because they cannot afford to do it. Almost close to 70% have a runway of less than 4 months. So I understand the government is trying to lift the lockdown, but if the lockdown persists for a long time, I think 70%, that's a huge number that are going to close down. Another 46% is going to planning to lay off at least 50% of their employees within the next 4 months if the things don't improve. And this is again to think about whether the stimulus packages, everything that are being declared, those are good, but can they reach the SMEs on time? And already 14% of the SMEs have started laying off employees as well. I also want to take a look back and also talk a bit about the startups. Startups are not directly part of SMEs, but it often gets discussed and is effectively under the government definition. Startups are a kind of large part of their the discussion that goes on as well. On the startup segment, we see again 24% have stopped their business operations. Most of them are based on Dhaka and Chittagong, the more capital and the commercial capital. 56% of the startups are seeing at least a 50% drop in revenue. Of the e-commerce businesses, 80% of them have seen a drop in revenue. 60% of the SMEs, similar to the startups, have a runway, similar to the SMEs, is also have a runway less than 3 months. And again, just to give an impact, just like SMEs contribute to 7.8 million employment, startups again commit to around 1.5 million employment. So in total, both these sectors creates an employment of over 9.3 million people. So that's a lot. And the annual loss estimated by the Venture Capital Private Equity Association of Bangladesh is around $56 million on a yearly basis. So these are some of the large fingers and some of the impacts that we are seeing. And again, just to give a bit of background, on the SME side, of course, service is the biggest, but again, SMEs again contribute 25%. So there's a large, it might not seem that they're contributing a lot to the GDP, but again, some of the figures that, 80% of the non-agricultural jobs that are actually created by SMEs, and every 2 jobs out of 3 in the private sector on the SMEs. So in terms of employment creation, that's huge. So again, the survey that we did it all across Bangladesh, and it had across all different kind of industries that we covered: services, agriculture, different verticals like poultry and dairy, and again, different kind of services verticals as well. Again, as I said, that 52% have already shut down their operations, and again, 28% at least seeing large decrease in revenue and a small decrease in revenue around 11%. And so as the lockdown and everything goes, we'll see these numbers scaling. 46% is thinking of laying off 50% of their staff. So that's a huge amount of unemployment that happened. And if that happens, we'll again see emerging of the new poor. By new poor, I mean groups that have already come out of the poverty line, but by the definition of the government, but they might again slip back into that poverty conditions as well. 4 months, that's the window that most of the SMEs have, and they will exhaust all their cash reserves and the resources that they have if things don't particularly improve. And this was something interesting. When asked that in this crisis, what did you miss most to survive? I think more than 50% said that they need soft loans with concessional interest rate. Only 9% said actually government grant. They said they need soft loans, flexible terms of working capital, and flexible installment packages of their existing loans. So that's something to think about. That maybe a lot of the things can be, structured the financial stimulus package to give them concessional loans over a longer period of time, so that they can weather this particular crisis. And if they ask that what they're kind of spending, obviously the marketing was the first expense that they will optimize, and they will optimize rent, distribution, operations, and then they want to cut salaries at the last step. But again, that's something they will have to do if things don't really improve. We also did a kind of like a comparison of what's happening with other countries. You can see that Bangladesh, as a percentage of the total stimulus package, is good. Around 41% of the stimulus package is dedicated for SMEs, closing around $4.5 billion. But again, compared to even India and Thailand, the Bangladesh number is almost 1/3 or 1/5. And if I go back, again, this is divided into cottage industries, agricultural sector, farmers, again, working capital and agricultural credit schemes. And, this has to be deployed in a cheaper way. If it's the way that it's done through banks, that is expensive. Bank infrastructure is also difficult. Bank credit underwriting policies are also complicated. So we need to find better ways to do this, preferably through existing MFI network, including more digital financial solutions in the whole aspect as well. And we do need to maintain a large transparency here, because that's, Bangladesh is not really good at maintaining a lot of transparency. So these stimulus packages, when they're rolled out, those things should be structured as well. Some of the things that we think that will create a lot of impact is the concessional loans. But again, adding to Zeeshan that was said, we mentioned that the banks are not really equipped to do this on their own. MFIs should be incorporated who have the large network. And again, we need to make this smart. So for example, we believe this has to be smart money. So often there has to be business management support and market linkages support when these loans go out. Otherwise, they will just exhaust the reserve. So being smart, I mean, migrate a lot of these SMEs into DFSs, figure out how to do the, digital supply chain. By that, I mean that, large demands are happening in the urban areas. For example, in Bangladesh, there is an order for around 50,000 order per day for delivering, grocery and essential services. But the e-commerce companies right now can only serve up to 20,000 because of capacity issues. Is there a way to integrate more SMEs into this sector, or displaced worker to become retrained to become, a delivery or logistics players, so that, they can provide the goods and services to these large pockets of urban markets that exist. And the current model of doing credit is difficult. So if you can link it up with DFSs, I know some of the startups are doing that, like Sheva XYZ or ShopUp, who are working in digital credit. But if those innovations can be picked up from the startup and can be mainstreamed, I think the SMEs will have better speed on getting access to credit and linking up with this all digital channel. And for the SMEs to also realize that in the pre-COVID-19 world, being digital was an option, but in the post-COVID-19 world, being digital and being connected is a necessity. That's something to think about as well. And the last point that I want to say, that we don't know what the recovery is going to look like. Most possibly, we are thinking this is going to be an U-shaped recovery, but it can be L-shaped, can be Y-shaped. We don't know. It's too hard to tell. A lot of uncertainties here on vaccines, what's going to happen all over the world. So we need to prepare for the worst. So the SMEs need to figure out on the different models, that how do they stabilize, how do they reopen their operations, maybe in a different mode, how do they adapt, and then figure out growth. So thinking of it's like a racetrack. It's on the bend, definitely. It's tough going through this race car bend, but this is where you kind of figure out, how to plan, how to adapt with the right kind of capacity that needs to be there. Again, thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions and answers that you guys might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Bijon. Just a quick question before we move on. What is the situation with the lockdown in Bangladesh? How long has it been, and how long is it expected going forward?
So the lockdown formally is still May 15th as of now. I think it's close to have been 30+ days, over a month. But things are supposed to reopen before Eid. So the shopping malls have been opened in limited capacity up till 4 to 5 p.m. The mosques are also going to be open, again, limited capacity. Some of the government offices and banks are open on limited capacity, like every Mondays and Thursdays. But I think the cases, we don't seem to have reached the peak yet. There were 768 cases in the last 24 hours. So I think definitely more testing and maybe a bit more cautious approach needs to be taken. So while we don't have any clarity that whether after May 15th, the government is going to open up or not, but as it looks like just before Eid, Bangladesh will come out of lockdown, but we can't say the cases and everything are dropping at the moment.
Got it. Thank you very much. Before we move on, I do want to mention that Farzeen, Ferdous Alam, who's the chairman of Oggro Ventures, was not able to be with us because of illness, not COVID, but he was ill enough that he was not able to attend today. So we miss him and wish him well in his recovery, and undoubtedly we'll be able to tap in at some other point. So our last speaker then is Dishen Maharaj. He's the co-founder of B.E.T. He joins us from South Africa. He is the co-founder of this firm, B.E.T. It stands for Business Enabling Toolbox. It's at yvrbet.com. It's a very unique solution for small and medium-sized businesses, and one of the ways of small businesses to be able to recover. It's an opportunity to go from here to this new brave world that many of us need to be stepping into. So Dishen, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today.
Thank you. Thanks, Doug. And thanks to GC Barisal and HQ Cesar. Thank you. I know a lot goes into all these global now, so I'm excited and thrilled to and embracing the opportunity to be with this esteemed panelist. I just want to share my screen, Cesar. Could you please just tell me, is my screen visible?
Looks good, Dishen.
Perfect. Thank you. Doug again, and to Maimun. With that being said, I'd like to get straight into my topic. I think it's always good to set the scene and provide some context with some statistics, as Bijon did on his side. So here goes, the World Bank Group suggests that there's a minimum of 365 million SME businesses operating in just developing markets. From this, only roughly around about plus minus 80 million of these businesses are formalized and registered tax-paying entities. Another astounding fact is that 25% of SMEs are failing within their first year and 50% within the first 4 years. That's all scary if you ask me, and that's just in developing economies. Let's now think about the number of informal SMEs operating in the rest of the world. And if we were to combine these with the developing markets trying to formalize these, what the impact of this could be on our local and global economies. Post the COVID-19 pandemic, it is also estimated that 7.5 million SMEs would cease to exist. I mean, this is just an eye-opening and a very real possibility. The potential for growth, however, and societal change is also massive with this. Not all these formal and informal SMEs, or formal or informal SMEs, that's it, have the necessary support structures or systems in place to allow for their growth and sustainability. So what do I mean? Well, globally, development agencies or other units are being forced to think about how they positively impact the societies they operate in and the role they can play in trying to promote, fund, and save SME trade in this new normal. Because of the specialized programs and initiatives with varying focuses are run, however, these are for short periods and usually only a handful of these businesses benefit from them due to varying constraints. The group of SMEs without any form of support is the category that I would want to specifically talk about. Based on my experience of being an SME, working with them and being on various development programs, I see 5 common reasons why they fail. These are capital constraints, lack of planning, ineffective marketing, no business oversight, and pricing. From these 5 reasons, there's an opportunity to learn and respond to failure or possible threats by using experiences as lessons. Essentially, I'm saying that these factors impact all businesses, not size or industry specific. And what differentiates successful SMEs is their ability to be agile, to learn, and to respond and adjust to the environments that are so dynamic and fast-paced. This brings me to my next point, learning. If we know that we operate and live in a world where information is available and accessible 24/7, and that the world is driven by technology, how are SMEs responding to this? It doesn't matter where SMEs operate, whether it be in emerging markets or not, information and technology must be seen as an enabler. Some considerations that I believe SMEs should be capitalizing on are access to information, globalization, cost controls, and information and technology management. Let's look at these individually. Access to information. We have access to information 24/7. This gives SMEs a competitive advantage which has changed drastically over the last decade. Research, statistics, and solutions are available to business owners with the click of a button. If we look at globalization, barriers to entry, as it was previously mentioned, in certain instances have dropped. SMEs can now access a global market and have opportunities to globally collaborate. Looking at cost controls, costs need to be controlled in any business to be effective and to become more competitive. Examples such as automation and outsourcing are just some of the actions that can be taken. Mindful trade-offs have to be made. Lastly, and most importantly for me, is information and technology management. The accessibility, relevance, and validity of business performance data. This is crucial in any business. Should SMEs have the correct information available at the time it's needed, this could be used to make better informed business decisions. A good example would be small business now being able to adapt from face-to-face operations to having an online presence, being able to upskill their employees online and monitor business performance in real time. In my opinion, if an SME is looking to grow, improve, or transform, these should be considered. I understand that for an SME business owner, so much time is spent working in the business that there isn't enough time to work on the business, to plan and adapt to the environment that these businesses operate in. I feel having a mechanism in place to bridge between fundamental business knowledge, relevant data, and efforts could assist in fostering sustainability for businesses. And that's where B.E.T comes in. B.E.T has been developed to assist with just that, not being industry or business size specific, and through its unique diagnostic approach, as Doug's mentioned, this enables SMEs to build capability, implement what's learned, monitor and evaluate business performance, have access to market, and mentor support all in a single platform, 24/7. By developing B.E.T, we hope that we play our part to assist SMEs on their growth and sustainability journey, uplift the economies in which they operate in, and most importantly, support the livelihood of the communities where these businesses trade and exist. Thank you.
Thank you, Dishen. We'll now shift over to the Q&A portion of our program. One of the things that Bijon talked about was a couple different opportunities, one in the e-commerce area, and I think, Bijon, you asked and you mentioned about e-commerce and that there's a lack of capacity and that more is necessary. You also talked about that digital is necessary. What then are the implications for SMEs, addressing what you said, that they need to go e-commerce, they need to go digital?
Well, thank you, Doug. So what I'm saying is that on the pre-COVID world, SMEs could think that they can just serve their locality and they can grow organically like that. But on the post-COVID-19 world, it becomes more low touch. And I think this is somewhere that SMEs not necessarily, if they continue to be on the path that they will be analog, they won't be able to survive. On the urban side, we're seeing a concentration of demand because the more middle income population who needs high quality producers are here, and they are not being able to serve because the information and everything is not linked. So the supply, since the supply chain is not very linked, it's in pockets. They are just serving close to the order that actually goes out right now in the market in the COVID-19 is 50,000 orders for e-commerce every day. They're just being able to serve 20,000 orders. So there is a gap of 30,000 orders just in Dhaka city alone. As this becomes more evolving, more other cities will join, that these demands will escalate. And the e-commerce companies are basically marketplaces. They need to integrate the supply chain, and they cannot continuously increase their logistics and fulfillment if the SMEs doesn't come into the digital space. So I think it's high time the SMEs also realize that, and some of them are doing it. Some of them are going into digital channels with a lot of these e-commerce companies. And I think if that happens, then we might see that SMEs are becoming the new kind of fulfillment services for all these e-commerce companies. I think there are strong cases for that in the developed world, including in the US markets, like where Amazon kind of becomes a hub for a lot of small businesses. And I think this is something that SMEs in Bangladesh also needs to think as they go into the future in the post-COVID-19 world.
Are there aggregators like Amazon is in parts of the world in Bangladesh, or is that still being evolving?
So the largest aggregator in Bangladesh is Chaldal.com. They're close to serve 5,000 orders per day. Very large, and they're serving large segment of the market for the last 5 years. And there are other small players like Telegram, Sheba XYZ, ShopUp, who are all coming up. So I think the aggregators will come. Amazon is very big in India, and might even come to Bangladesh. But I think SMEs need to realize that it's time they integrate with this digital value chain. It's not an option anymore. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity that in the post-COVID-19 world you integrate here.
Would any of the other speakers, including Maimun, like to address the digitalization and e-commerce transformations that are going on right now? certainly Dishen, in your case, you've got a product and a solution that uses technology and data to be able to manage their business. How does that then tie into some of the things they can be doing out in the real world?
Yes, I think, Doug, if we take a step back and if we look at pre-COVID-19, SMEs were basically operating on very limited resources already, and that includes the startups. And I think this, and specifically what we've seen, on our end is that the leverage of being able to use digital solutions to upskill, number one, have access to market, number two, and be able to implement and monitor and evaluate your business. Number three, being most paramount now for SME businesses, because where you had the human touch and the face-to-face interaction, which was very limited in the past, becomes very sort of non-existent now. So we feel, and we've seen that, with our platform in specific and our various partnerships, that this has now taken it a step forward and pushed SME businesses to actually start digitizing their offerings from an e-commerce point of view and using e-commerce or digital platforms as a learning solution as well.
So the data that we've seen shows some significant pain that's going on. Are we saying that companies in that pain should be potentially doing more pain by investing in technologies that they may not yet be familiar with? So how does a SMB approach that for their business, considering that there's fear, there's lack of resources, there's questions about what the future brings? How does an SMB approach that decision point to be able to pivot, to make the shift?
So I think coming out of COVID, I think there's a lot that, we look at a lot of opportunities in the sense that the way business as in general will be conducted. And I think the investment in digital technologies now is going to be something very much for the long term, because of how we forced as a global economy to do business now with COVID. So I think yes, there would be trade-offs in the short run, but I think in the long run, these would definitely be paying off, because it would be pivoting and aligning you to how business is going to be done in the future.
Got it. Zeeshan, what do you think?
Doug, since I talk about policy, I think one of the lessons that both Bijon and Dishen would be able to relate to that have happened over the past couple of years is when the digital financial services first came into Bangladesh, bKash, when Uber first came into Bangladesh, the regulatory framework around these new technology products was not only not ready, but it took frustratingly long for the government's policy framework to catch up, to let them operate in a legitimate fashion in the economy. So I think the government needs to be more agile, more nimble when it comes to paving the way for these technology-oriented businesses to enter the market and to operate with greater efficiency. That's all I had to add.
Okay, got it. There's a large question in the chat room, and I'd like to break it down into 2 or 3 pieces. Thank you, Rehan, for the question. The first question, or the first part of it, I'd love to hear your perspectives on China. Due to the COVID pandemic, the trade differences and conflict between China and the West is on the rise. What is your perspective of the relationship between Bangladesh and China, the region and China, and what are some of the implications you see coming out of what's happening, given that it kind of started from them and it's putting a lot of stress between the relationship between countries right now? How do you see that evolving?
Right, I think I can add, and then maybe Jishan, Maimun, feel free to add as well. I think there are three pieces here. The first piece is that what is happening between India and China, what is happening between China and rest of the world, and third, what is happening between China and the rest of the world, how it will impact Bangladesh. So if I go to the first piece, what is happening between Bangladesh and China? At the end of the day, Bangladesh has been a recipient of a large amount of debt from China. And these are long-term infrastructure debts, and I don't see it, going away in the short term. These are already committed infrastructure, like roads, highways, ports are already on the way, and this relationship is going to continue. Even on the financial market, there are Chinese investors in the Bangladeshi Dhaka Stock Exchange or the stock market. So I think these are more long-term relationships, and Bangladesh pre-COVID-19 was in good position with both India and China on this, because when you have two large neighbors like India on one side, China on one side, it gets a bit tricky, both of them trying to feed debts into the market. But China is obviously has much more, I would say, liquidity compared to India, and have a much more larger basket size. I think the total commitment was $24 billion. So that's almost 6-7% of our GDP. So I think with that kind of commitment, the relationship is there to stay. The government is in positive with China, and I think China is also trying to send medical teams and also equipments to support Bangladesh during the pandemic as well. So on the first piece, I think it's a more long-term relationship, because the commitments, investments China made is going to stay, and for a long time. On the second piece, what's happening with China, the rest of the world, I definitely see there has been a short-term fallout with the US. Of course, there was this US-China trade war that happened. Now this happened, and I think the Chinese will have a fallout with the US and the European market. But what's also very interesting is they're also having a fallout with even the Asia-Pacific market. Like even Japan is also thinking of shifting away manufacturing from China. So there has been talks that Japan wants to shift to India. There have been talks with the Modi government, them trying to do that. So it's not just Europe or the US, it's also maybe Japan and Korea who are thinking that, they want to diversify their, the current manufacturing base. And that is something that to think about, because when those diversification happens, who will benefit? And that actually brings me to my third point, what it means for Bangladesh. So India has already started making a move. I think Vietnam is in a good position with strong lockdown procedures. And I think Bangladesh also needs to think that if this shift starts happening from China, Bangladesh needs to be in the right position. Definitely from Japanese and Korean companies who wants to shift in the short term. B, definitely go double down with US and Europe that, if they're shifting, maybe Bangladesh can be a more credible sourcing destination. On the RMG industry, China now controls 39% of the market. Even if Bangladesh is the second largest player, it's just 5 or 6%. So there is a big difference. So you're trying to see if that gap can be closed. And C, this is more interesting on this third point. Even Chinese companies are also looking to shift, not only because of the COVID-19, but because of the increased manufacturing costs. And this also can be a good opportunity as well. So just to give an example, you might know that Samsung is setting up a factory here, and the phone that I'm using right now, Samsung Note 10, has been manufactured in Bangladesh, right? And you might also know that Xiaomi is also thinking of shifting a small part of their production to Bangladesh. So the Chinese companies are already doing that. We just need to see whether the COVID-19 scenario will expedite that or not. So those would be my few points on the questions that you mentioned.
Okay. Would anybody else like to comment on?
I think, Doug, I'll just add in one extra point. When we talk about digitization, so I was working with this company who were testing out their products in Bangladesh, actually. So it was for the restaurant industry, but I guess that also encompasses SMEs. And that was the platform as a service idea. So what we think about is we've seen a surge of use of the internet while people are locked inside the house. So since we see the increase of quick commerce right now, the idea of delivering through a motorbike instead of a full-fledged delivery truck. So if you incorporate that with the model of using Messenger, using WhatsApp, using Skype, and using messaging to directly order your goods without utilizing a new software, which is the traditional platform as a service, software as a service. So when you use the existing platforms and you can leverage them, and I think again, you can still go out and do what you have to do. You can still order from the restaurants, from the deliveries. You can still get the clothes that you want. And you already have this existing market base without having to spend more on marketing budgets. So if you use a platform as a service model, maybe someone in Bangladesh could introduce that. And I think it's applicable to most parts of the world right now, that where you'd have to have higher operational costs, developing a new platform, just use existing platforms, get access to the goods and connect to the buyers. Yeah.
Very good. The continuation of the question earlier, starting with China, then what is the role for Western countries? Bijon, you touched a little bit on that in terms of some of the things they can do to create growth opportunities. What role do you see Western nations playing in the region?
So I think the whole system will take a bit of time to stabilize and figure out what's happening. So I think what's happening is that China is kind of coming out of their lockdowns and their economic activities, and they've started doing that. And the West is still, still under lockdown. I think the economic impact is going to continue. And China also started, started trading more on their local currency as opposed to doing international trades with dollars. So within their trading partners, they're trying to pay with Chinese money. So I think these are more long-term implications. Additionally, I would say the West, also especially the United States, the falling of the oil prices also has a large impact. Definitely the OPEC countries, so that would mean including Russia and other players, but also it means the price of the shale oil and everything that the US also was thinking is also coming down as well. So I think it is emerging like a very interesting geopolitical and economic scenario. At this moment, I don't see a direct where this actually go, but what I do see is that the West and the Chinese relationship becoming a bit more strained, and each of them trying to build their own ecosystems, to support any future shocks that might come. So, for example, the West might start thinking that instead of starting manufacturing from China, maybe they will go for nearshore manufacturing. Maybe try to do it out of Mexico, that's close by, or try to figure out some of the manufacturing in-house. Similar things might happen in Europe with tourism and everything, cutting jobs and everything. They might start figuring out that you need to bring down some of these things inside the country or inside the region at least. So whereas those kind of things starts happening, I think the relationship will get more strained, but I don't think China will slow down at this point. They will continue to try to push, increase their free trade activities. And I think, they have substantial investment in figuring out the Silk Route that they've been trying to do for a long time. And I think they will continue to invest in that.
Sounds good. We have a little less than 10 minutes to go. This series is Let's Disrupt, and the people who are watching around the world are typically disruptors. They're looking for opportunities. And so we've talked a little bit about the digitalization and e-commerce and quick commerce that Maimon talked about. Where else should these disruptors, this community of small and medium-sized businesses that have some flexibility to be able to shift and pivot, where should they be looking? We certainly have opportunities in masks, right? In personal protective equipment right now, in medicine, medical type things. And we've talked about digital and e-commerce. Where should people be thinking and shifting? And then what are the resources they should be reaching out to get the help that they need to make the pivot? Anybody like to start that one? You want to kick us off, Maimon?
Well, I wasn't supposed to be a traditional panelist today, but putting me on the hot seat, I guess, Doug. I guess when you see small businesses, I think the future is open for everybody, right? I was on this Instagram show the other day, and where we talked about is the world that we are heading on to when we thought of Let's Disrupt was that, the 4IR. And now you have a world that has been continuously or like irrevocably disrupted by COVID. So when you have these two disruptions and two waves coming about, it's a whole different world that we can't predict anymore. It's a world where now thinking about what would be housing. How are you going to pay your own rent now? You know, so would you want to put this on e-commerce? Would you want to get rental housing? Or do you want to think of having a permanent home? These become new questions that were never really asked before. So when we go forward, I think you target one specific area, that think small and think through communities. And that's, again, another thought that we had of, the Let's Disrupt idea, that I think it should be very community-based growth, because today we're talking maybe about Bangladesh and we're talking about LDCs. So some solutions which are best practices in the West may not be best practices over here, but they may be best practices, let's say in Djibouti, they may be best practices in Kenya. So that's where I think we need to think that what are the local problems? Let's try to solve those local solutions, and very community-based communal solutions. And maybe that's the step we can use, using technology, using best business processes, and of course, understanding cultures. And the global culture can actually propel us forward. We need to get out of this. Right now, I think global trade, as I was talking about in the previous webinar, one of the top freight experts was saying, we don't know. We've been in this business for 100 years. We don't know when we can open up our trading routes again. So thinking there, I think businesses have to be localized. And again, who does these things better than SMEs? Yeah.
Zeeshan, when you hear about these changes and you hear about these opportunities and you understand where Bangladesh and developing countries are today, is the country ready? How does the shift happen?
Thanks, Doug. Is the country ready, as in, is the private sector, are the disruptors and SMEs ready, or
are there enough disruptors to get the ball rolling, to get others? Obviously, the laggards are going to be lagging, right? But in terms of is there enough early adopters in Bangladesh and developing countries to grab the opportunity and to move forward with it and to lead others?
For Bangladesh, again, looking at the kind of stats that Bijon shared with us, I would think so. I would think there would be enough, but how they do it is something to watch out for. And echoing what Maimun said, I think the length of the lockdown has really infused in consumers certain habits, certain things that they're now accustomed to. And I think those need to be very closely analyzed as to what are the things that customers are now going to be used to, what are they now going to take for granted. I think when we say new normal, it's not only a cliche, but a lot of services, a lot of products, more so services, I think, are going to have to evolve to adjust to the new normal. And it can be ranging from online delivery of most things, if not everything, to everything else. I mean, starting from what Bijon was sharing, a haircut. What's the business model how does the business model change around haircut and personal grooming? I think those things need to be thought. I know we're not eternally going to be in lockdown, but I think the lockdown has been long enough, or is looking to be lengthy enough to have certain shifts in people's habits and expectations. And I think those consumer behavior insights are going to be very valuable in the design of new products that are going to come and take over in the coming days. And hopefully there are enough disruptors to leverage this situation.
Hopefully so. Any comments on that, Bijon or Dishen?
To Zeeshan's point, Doug, it's all about implementation. We know what needs to be done, why it needs to be done, and it's the how that we need to actually look at sort of solving for, right? I think globally it's created a burning platform for all businesses to think of their operations, not only from, for example, a haircut organization or delivery service, but any type of business. How do you pivot from face-to-face to online in a matter of overnight? Because I think for many regions, I know I speak for South Africa, overnight it was a lockdown, and it was that pivot in the mindset, and I think the resilience and the ability to be agile in this environment that's going to really start creating the sustainable SME business, or the sustainable SME going forward.
We're in the wrap-up phase. So Dishen, while we have you on screen, could you just take 30 seconds and maybe leave the SMEs with some hope and some thinking in terms of what should their next steps be?
So I think, like I'm an optimist. I look at the opportunity that comes out of this. Lots of what we're facing now, as Zeeshan mentioned, is not going to be sort of an eternal. It's going to eventually ease out. And I think in this time, it should give us SMEs, and I think business as a whole, to realign and refocus, and relook at, their goals and take their goal planning a lot more seriously as to what they want to achieve and how they're going to achieve it within their organization. As I've mentioned before, it's all about learning, unlearning, and relearning. I think that's what we're going through now as a global economy, forgetting some of the traits and what we've done in the past, and actually finding a new normal as to how we're going to become or stay sustainable going forward into the future.
Thank you. Zeeshan, would you like to make some closing statement?
Thanks, Doug. Once again, so I think as much as we talk, I know the Global Chamber talks mostly about disruptors and businesses, but I think to dance the dance, the government, the people at the helms of policy, they need to be sensitized. They need to be dancing to the same tune, not miss a step, so that the SMEs can do what they aim to do. Hopefully, they're not obstacles to the very energy that SMEs bring to this scorched post-COVID market that we have in front of us. So my expectation would be from the policy end to have more enabling policies, more agile policies, and more flexibility in terms of enabling the environment for any and all kinds of businesses to thrive. Let that not be a hindrance. But one small example would be, like, if anything is to happen in the medical testing kit space from the private sector, without going into too much detail, I think in Bangladesh there has been some very infuriating resistances, which one could wish if there were not, then we would have seen so much more innovation that could happen. So my hope would be, my parting thoughts and sincerest hopes would be that the policymakers don't stand in the way, but show the way for innovation to happen.
It sounds like beyond SMBs, there's an opportunity for government also to change and be more nimble and agile and supportive and enabling rather than a barrier.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, that's true in every country, by the way. So I think we're seeing that everywhere. Bijon, would you like to make a closing statement as well?
Right. I think from the perspective of a small business unit, I think we go through this every 10 years or so. Like in 2000, we had this internet bubble burst. In 2008-9, we had the financial crisis. 2020, we are having COVID. 2030, we'll have something less. As a business, we go through this, and this is a part of our business cycle. Going that, the businesses that are going to survive are going to adapt, they're going to grow, and they will be in an extremely good position when these two shall pass, and be it's 21 something or 22, they will be in a very good growth trajectory as well. So stay strong for the SMEs. Try to figure out, get the right kind of skill sets, get the right kind of resources in line, survive. And I think these two shall pass, and then when the cloud lifts, there is always growth opportunities for us.
Very good. I'd like to end this program by turning it over to Maimun Mustafa. And Maimun, how did this event go relative to your expectations? And then tell us a little bit more about the coming up, the two different Let's Disrupt programs that you have planned. Oh, Maimun, are you there? You might be on mute.
Hi.
There you go.
Thank you. First of all, my gratitude again to all the panelists today for the amazing repertoire of information that they brought over here. I think this was a very cohesive, group, and we saw things from not so usual perspective. Going ahead, this talked about businesses, economics. So the next theme we'll talk about more is sustainability, environmental sustainability, and of course sustainability in general, and green businesses. And that's our topic for next Wednesday. But we are hopefully coming at a better time, around 7 a.m. Pacific time. So we hope that our fellow members of the Global Tribe and other attendees in that part of the West Coast can, attend to us. And we have an amazing lineup of speakers for that. A PhD from Harvard, and two amazing people who worked really good with, who have connections to Bangladesh, but are working in Minnesota and New Orleans. So we look forward to that, and we would invite our speakers to come to our next session of Let's Disrupt on May 13th. Thank you.
Thank you to all the speakers. We really appreciate your knowledge and expertise, and we'll talk to you next Wednesday. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.